Okay. Hello, all. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join this webinar. What works for multilingual and immigrant origin student success, making sense of the evidence. I'm Nate Schwartz. I'm the Director of Applied Research at the Annenberg Institute at Brown University, and a co-founder of an initiative called EdResearch for Action that aims to provide better practical synthesis of research findings for school, district, and state leaders. This webinar is the work of multiple organizations beyond Annenberg, so I just wanted to highlight the other organizations that you can see on this screen who came together to make this possible. We co-planned this with Education Trust, which, as many of you know, is a policy and advocacy organization that leads the charge in working toward a fairer system of education for all students, and with the National Newcomer Network, a recently founded organization that directly takes on inequities for newcomer students. We also work with Results for America, a national nonprofit which supports better use of evidence across state and local government. I know that all of you who are listening can't see the participant list, but in the audience today, we have over 100 live listeners, a list that includes policy advocates, leaders in school systems across the country, and even some teachers who are able to grab time during planning periods or during the day to listen in on this important discussion. You should be able to see that you have a question function in your Zoom screen. Please use this. We'll be actively monitoring this link, and we're excited to bring your questions into the conversation whenever possible. I think you can ask questions with either your name or anonymous, but if you do choose to be anonymous, please let us know what part of the education system you work in or how you're connected to schools. So for example, tell us if you're a district leader who works in a large urban district or principal or whatever it is, say that as a lead into your question, and it'll help situate us and ground us. So here's the plan for today, if you could move to the agenda slide. We're doing this webinar as two mini panel discussions. The first one of these, moderated by Nancy Duchesneau from EdTrust, looks at supporting multilingual English learners. So the students where schools are specifically tasked with teaching them English alongside whatever else they're doing. And we're thinking about how to support these students in ways that directly support their social, emotional, and academic development. The second mini panel, moderated by Alejandra Vasquez-Barr from the National Newcomer Network, looks at ways we can support all newcomer students, regardless of their language status. And we're joined by some incredible panelists today. If you could go to the next slide. You can see we've got Luma Mufla, who is the CEO and founder of the Fuji's Family Organization, and she'll tell you more about that organization. Madeline Mavrocordato, professor at Michigan State University, who works directly to support multilingual learners. Jamie Olney, a teacher at the Empire School District in Stanislaus County, California. And thank you, Jamie. I know you are actively giving up a teaching period to come join us. Emma Merrill, the director of Las Sierras Academy at Collegiate Academies in New Orleans, Louisiana. And Carolyn Satin-Bajaj, an associate professor at UC, the University of California, Santa Barbara. And before we go into the panels, if you could go to the next slide, I'll just call out that this webinar is anchored in two briefs released by our EdResearch for Action initiative. And we'll drop links to these in the chat so that you can get to them. And these are authored by our research panelists. For those of you who are curious to learn more about EdResearch for Action, I'll say a bit more at the end. But for now, I'll just highlight that the goal of our work is not to summarize single research studies, which I think there are lots of those research summaries out there. But we're trying to think about how to apply the joint expertise of researchers and education leaders to figure out what we as a community know across studies and how this can help us all better answer the question of what we can do now based on the evidence to create the best possible schooling experiences for all of our students. So with that, we'll launch right into discussion. I'll turn it over to Nancy Duchesneau to kick off the panel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Nancy Duchesneau. I am a senior research manager with the Education Trust. And today I'm going to be facilitating a really wonderful panel focused on advocating for multilingual English learners through a social, emotional, and academic development lens. We're going to shorten that to SEED just because it's kind of long. The Education Trust is a national nonprofit aimed at closing opportunity gaps for students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. I also just want to give a big shout out to Manny Zapata, who is behind the scenes today, but really helped me put this panel together, and will be answering questions as you ask them in the Q&A. So I want to do a little bit of framing first before we jump into the panel. And I usually do this mostly to illustrate how important it is to think about social, emotional, and academic development as an integrated effort, and to think about it from a systemic lens. And so I like to tell the story of a student. So imagine this young woman. Her name is Bel Caliz. She's an Afro-Latina sophomore in high school, and her family immigrated from the Dominican Republic last year. Her first language is Spanish, and while she knew some English before moving to the US, she's really been building her English language skills quickly since she moved. Imagine it's about 3 months into the school year right now, and she feels like she's built overall pretty good relationships in her school. But as she walks into her first period class, she's reminded of how frustrated she feels sometimes with some of her teachers who haven't bothered to learn her name still. And so she's particularly thinking about her first period teacher who, as she goes through the roll call, calls her Belle because she's given up on learning to say Bel Caliz. And so when she says here, her teacher looks up at her and notices her hair, which is in twists. And her teacher says, twists aren't permitted. It's not a permitted hairstyle, and sends her to the office. So she tries to explain to the administrator in the office that her hairstyle is really important to her, but she's ultimately told that if she doesn't change it by tomorrow, that she's going to be sent home from school. So then she moves on to homeroom, where she's handed a slip of paper that she needs to give to her parents that says when parent-teacher conferences are. And she asks if there's a version in Spanish that she can take home, and is told that there isn't. She'll need to translate it for her parents when she gets home. And on top of that, she knows that her parents aren't going to feel comfortable going to the parent-teacher conference because they won't have translators available for her parents. And so Bel Caliz spends the rest of the day kind of ruminating on these issues, and feeling kind of unwelcome and frustrated, which then impacts the way that she thinks about the way that she engages in her academic learning that day. And so the point of this story is to really illustrate that the way that the system is set up is impacting Bel Caliz's experience and her social emotional experience, which then is impacting her academic experience. And so the really great thing about this is that there are really great recommendations on how to improve the system, improve the practices that exist within schools and districts to make sure that Bel Caliz feels a sense of belonging within her school. And so this brief in particular is really great at illustrating some of those policies and practices. And so we're going to really dive into some of that today with our panelists. So without further ado, let me introduce our really wonderful panelists. We have Madeline Mavrocordato, who is an associate professor of K-12 educational administration and policy in the College of Education at Michigan State University. Her research investigates how education policies and leadership practices expand or constrain educational opportunity for historically and currently underserved students, particularly multilingual students classified as English learners. She also studies how to recruit, retain, evaluate, and support educators and leaders who are prepared to serve the new demography of American public schools. Her research is anchored by her experience serving as a bilingual teacher in South Texas along the Mexican border and the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. Mavrocordato received her PhD in Leadership and Policy Studies from Vanderbilt University. And we have Luma Mafala, who is the visionary founder and CEO of Fuji's Family. She's also an author and coach who believes in the power of sports to build resilience, bridge divides, and empower refugee kids to thrive. Born in Amman, Jordan, Luma came to the United States to attend college and became a refugee seeking asylum. In 2004, a chance meeting inspired her to start a soccer team, the Fugees, for kids from refugee families who were starting new lives in a small community in rural Georgia. When Luma realized that many of the kids on the team, some of whom had already been in school in the US for years, were still struggling with basics like reading and writing, she knew she had to do something to help. And so Luma started a school based around a new educational model that she developed specifically for refugee kids. The school that began with a makeshift classroom in a church basement continued to grow and eventually encompassed a summer camp, college prep, a network of charter schools with campuses in multiple states, and finally, a nationally recognized program that's used in school districts across the country. Named a top 10 hero by CNN, Luma is a speaker, leader, and expert on team building and education who uses her unique vision, life experience, and humor to inspire others. So thank you both so much. So I want to start with, because the way that we name and identify students impacts the way that they identify themselves and how we think about those students. And so I really want to start with Dr. Mavrogato. Why are we using the term multilingual English learners, or MLELs?
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with folks this afternoon. Thanks to everybody for taking the time to be here. So this question around terminology, I think, is a really important one, particularly because you hear all sorts of terms that are used to sort of describe this general student population. We are choosing today to use multilingual student classified as English learner, as Nancy said, MLEL, because of a real desire to strike a balance between an asset-based approach and emphasizing student strengths along the lines of being multilingual, right? And surfacing that piece because speaking multiple languages is a superpower, right? And at the same time, we want to balance that asset-based approach with specificity and being very clear about the group of students who is legally entitled to language development support and services, and that is the group in federal law identified as English learners. Multilingual learners are often a term that you hear used on their own, but that population can also include students who, for example, might have a primary language of English, but be participating in a dual language program. They're taught in Spanish, another language being taught in that program. It also encompasses students who were formerly classified as English learners, but have exited that legal classification because they've met the thresholds that have been set by their state. And so just for our purposes today, we're saying MLEL to be both asset-based, but specific and intentional around the students that we have a legal obligation to serve under federal.
Thank you. Luma, why is it important for leaders to focus on supporting these students?
I mean, I think for me, it's personal. I came here when I was 18. I had a good education. I was born and raised in Jordan. And my first language is Arabic. And my parents had sent me to British and American schools because they believed that was the best the world had to offer. And in my naive, idealistic mind, I thought every school in the United States was like the State Department run American school I went to. And so I was shocked here when a group of kids I was coaching soccer didn't know how to read, even though they had been in the country 3-4 years. And it broke my heart, because I truly believe that education is the lever for change and for upward mobility, but it's not fair that people don't access it. Not everyone has access to it. And it's super important because our demographics are changing. You know, people can say, oh, we're going to tuck them away. It's not important. It's only a small group. But the data shows that by 2025, almost 25% of students will be multilingual. And we have to do something about it. We have to embrace it. They're great for our schools and our communities, and we can do so much better than what we're doing right now.
So with the MLEL student population rising across US schools, Dr. Mavrogidato, what are some of the challenges they face in accessing support?
So I'll name a few. I'm sure our attendees could surface a number of additional challenges, right, in their own respective contexts, but some that sort of rise to the top here. I think first and foremost, we just have this issue that our students who are coming in, who are immigrant students or MLEL students, they're encountering education policies and systems and traditions that were just not built with them in mind, with them or their families in mind. And so they're sort of running up against these systems, right, that can really pose barriers for them. So that's sort of a general umbrella piece, right? Sort of a need to really re-examine our systems to see who are they catering to, who are they privileging in terms of our policies, our systems, our practices, hidden curricula, so on and so forth. I think one of the greatest challenges that a lot of our students face has to do with issues around how services are being provided to students. And when I'm referring to services, I'm referring to English language development services or other language development services, such as bilingual programs. Often in school districts and in schools across our country, there is a strong desire to sort of tick a box that we are providing services to students. It tends to be very compliance oriented and legalistic, when in fact the services that we may be providing to students may not be well aligned with their specific learning needs. And so how does that look? Sometimes, for example, if you're in a middle or high school setting, there may be one class that students who are classified as MLEL students are forced to take, right, to meet a legal obligation. So the school says, well, they have to take this class because this is how we show that we're serving the students. But when you're thinking about students who are going into that classroom, you may have some who are newcomers, which our next panel will talk in depth about, right? Who may be coming from a background where they've had very limited exposure to formal education, as Luma was reflecting on just a minute ago. Or you may have students who come in highly literate and well-educated in a different language, right? But they're all going into this same space because that's the approach that the school or district has chosen to take so that they can indicate we are, quote, serving these students, right? So on paper, they're being served, but in practice, they're not, because we know that those students are not going to be getting, not all of those students are going to be getting what they need in a classroom that is supposed to be meeting all of these different needs in one space around English language development. So I think there are really big issues around decisions that we're making to serve different groups of students. I'll pause there. We can come back to this if we have more time.
Thanks. So full disclosure for everyone, I had the opportunity to visit the Fuji schools that Luma founded, and I walked away feeling the most impressed I've ever felt walking out of a school. And I think part of that is because she's clearly thought about a lot of these barriers and experiences of students and very thoughtfully put together a learning experience and environment that supports these students. So Luma, gonna put you on the spot there. What are some ways that Fuji's has been successful at creating communities where broadly diverse students and families belong?
Thank you, Nancy, for that. I love it when people say, you know, they love visiting our schools and seeing our students. I think in some ways we were very lucky. I mean, we started off as a zero tuition private school, so we didn't have a lot of guardrails. So we could really design it with the student at the center of it, right? I mean, the guardrails we had was fundraising, but in some ways fundraising is a lot easier than antiquated policies and restrictions that don't allow you to serve the students. And then we moved into the charter space, a little bit more guardrails. And then we moved into the public school district partnership space. And we centered in all of our approaches, the student, not what's best for the teachers, not what's best for the district, what is best for the student. We're an organization that started as a soccer team. Every single kid in our school plays on a soccer team. Music and arts are integrated for every kid. They're not an elective that you get once a week. You get it 3 to 4 times a week because it's ways our students love learning. We took a lot of time understanding what makes you want to come to school, what makes you excited, what makes you feel safe. Embracing all the kids' backgrounds and identities. Like at our schools, it feels like there's a celebration literally every week, whether it's student birthdays or a cultural celebration or a religious holiday that some of the students observe, and we take it as an opportunity to learn about each other. Smaller practices of, we greet every kid by name at the door every single morning. You know, in professional training with the teachers, we spend 4 to 5 hours with the teachers practicing how to pronounce their names properly. And it's little things like that that matter. We have an accelerated academic model. It's an English immersion model. So we say English is our first language, soccer is our second language. And our students are met where they are. If you are illiterate in your home language, and we're going to start you with the basics. And we've seen our students do 2 to 3 years of academic growth a year. And when they're ready to mainstream back in, they're ready. It's not, we don't check boxes. They're ready.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be diving a little bit deeper at the end of this panel into some of that academic growth, because it is very impressive. And so what does the research say? What are the evidence-based policies and practices that truly create a sense of belonging for MLELs?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I'll also just make a plug for that brief again, because this brief goes into a whole lot of different pieces here. But just to highlight a few, and I'm really glad to sort of focus in on this piece of belonging, Nancy, that you asked about, because belonging is linked to academic outcomes, right? So, you know, often, as Nancy said at the outset, we think about social emotional learning and issues like belonging sort of separate from or apart from academic content or academic learning. And what we know is those two go absolutely hand in hand. So when we're thinking specifically about our MLEL population, I think a really good example of something that facilitates both belonging, but also really pushes on academic outcomes, according to what the very rigorous research literature tells us, is emphasizing bilingualism and biliteracy. And so often when I say this, people immediately say, well, wait a minute, we can't do bilingual ed in my school. We can't do a bilingual program in my district because we have just too many languages. What language would be picked? We don't have good support around bilingual education. In some settings, a robust bilingual education program is a real option, right? And those are wonderful. And the research tells us over and over and over again that students that go through bilingual programs, particularly bilingual programs that are dual language emphasized, right? Where there's a true emphasis on 2 languages and acquiring 2 languages and learning content in those 2 languages. We know from the research literature that these are the best models in terms of our student outcomes. However, in contexts where it may be difficult to implement one of those models, you can still have a bilingual culture. So what do I mean by that? That means things like we stock books in our school libraries that are in multiple languages, and we let students know that they're there, right? It means that we communicate in multiple languages, either through translation or interpretation services, hiring staff that speak and represent the languages that are represented in the building. It means, like Nancy said at the outset with her example of her one student, we learn how to say students' names, right? We learn how to refer to their parents, right? These kinds of things. So it's not just about a dual language program model, right? But it's also about doing things that support bilingualism and signal to students that their identities are valued in the building, because if you feel valued as an individual in a space, you are going to do better academically because you will want to be there because you see this as a supportive space for you and for your family.
Thanks. So I'm just going to go a tiny bit off script here, because there's one thing that I saw in the Fuji schools that I thought was just absolutely amazing and I think should happen everywhere. The Fuji schools have cultural liaisons. And Luma, I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, especially with regard to like how it brings parents into the fold and makes sure that, like, you know, we are creating that environment where there is like a multicultural expectation and respect and love of each other?
Yeah, so I'd say we're multicultural schools, like we're not bilingual schools. And part of it is the original design. We had over 30 languages, and most of the kids don't know their first language, can't recognize that. But for us, cultural liaisons serve multiple roles. So they're usually from the community, they're bilingual or multilingual, and they're bridges. They're the bridge. They're the bridge sometimes from teachers to students, sometimes from teachers to parents, and sometimes from students to parents as well, because there's also a need for a bridge for that. They spend time in the classrooms. They're not translators in the classroom. They don't interpret in the classroom. They're there to support, for students to see members of their community engaged in learning, to be role models. For parent communications, they're the ones that lead that work. For parent engagement, they lead that work. And they're the most trusted adults in the building because students can relate and see that connection to them. And the teachers see them as assets. I remember we did a cultural walkthrough of our classrooms right before school opening, and we're walking around, and one of our Afghan cultural liaisons asked the teacher to take down a poster of Malala. And she's like, what? I thought this was embracing some of the students that were coming in here. And he's like, she's political. For some of us, we don't want to see that. And then they strategized what ways could she bring that culture into her classroom. And it was beautiful baskets that they found at a local store that now students put some of their school supplies in, right? And so where can you bring in the different parts of their culture into the classroom, and who can guide you in that? It's our cultural liaisons.
Thank you. And so last question before we jump into the Q&A. Luma, could you, given the MLEL population is beautifully diverse, we know that identity development and making sure that students can bring their authentic selves to schools matter. How have you seen, having done this at Fugees, matter for students? How has it impacted them, especially when it comes to the academic growth? And I have a couple of slides that I'll put up for you as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think, like I mentioned, our primary focus is to create a place where kids feel safe and they belong, right? And when you create that environment and every little detail is designed, is mapped out, you see the phenomenal growth that we've seen in one of our partners in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where we've seen incredible growth, and we need that growth. If our students are coming in age 12, 13, and they're at the kindergarten level, then we need 2 to 3 years of growth a year. And that's what we're seeing. And so here you see students at Turanga Academy, which is our program, year over year, show this incredible academic growth. And this is compared to other ELs in the district and other students in the district. We've also seen growth, not just in math and reading. The attendance has skyrocketed because they want to come to school, because everyone cares about them, and we're very transparent with them. We have data talks with the student. We're like, okay, you're at this level at no fault of your own, and we're going to get you to here. And you're going to do it because you have managed to leave your country, learn a new language, embrace a new culture, so you can do anything. And we map out roadmaps for each student on which way we're going to get them to 8 to 9 years of academic growth in 3 years, so they can mainstream back into their school districts. Yeah.
Thank you. I do want to just point out this one particular last slide around absenteeism, because we know that chronic absenteeism is something that's become a huge issue for all schools and all districts across the country since the COVID-19 pandemic. And shameless plug, EdTrust has created an alliance with AEI and with Attendance Works to try to fight some of that and provide resources and support for districts and states trying to handle the situation. And so I think this really shows, though, that when you create like a sense of belonging for students, you really can tackle that issue. And then that issue, when it's tackled, can really impact academic growth.
Yeah.
So we do have some time for Q&A. And so feel free to put them in the chat. Well, I guess you all have like a Q&A option, not really a chat option. But please feel free to ask us questions. I'll start with just one question that has been raised for me is, I mostly notice that there are research-based initiatives being taken up for bilingual or multilingual Spanish-English speakers. Could you please share if there are efforts that support other languages as well? I'll let whoever wants to tackle that go for it.
So in the US, we have handfuls across the country, just sort of one-off bilingual programs that are in languages other than Spanish. But what we have seen is the most robust growth in Spanish in terms of formal bilingual education programs. There are some schools in Texas that are Vietnamese bilingual programs, and that has to do with a larger concentration of population of the Vietnamese population, particularly in the Houston area in Texas. But by and large, the research, especially larger quantitative research, has tended to focus on Spanish-English bilingual education models, just simply due to the proliferation of those schools in the U.S. So there's a real room for opportunity to do work in this area.
Okay. So I do just want to note that I'm seeing that there is just a shout out for your school, Luma, saying that they've heard good things about them. And then also there's a question for you, Luma. Can you say a bit more about the cultural liaisons? What is the process to become one in the school? Is there an interview process? Is there a stipend?
So for us, the cultural liaisons are adults employed by the school district. So they go through the application for the school district. We recently worked here with in Kentucky to lift the requirement of having a college degree to be employed by the school district in various positions, because our cultural liaisons, some of them, their college degree is not recognized here, right? And we got that waiver, and we have cultural liaisons that are part of the program. So they go through an interview process. The requirement is that they are bilingual and bicultural at a bare minimum, and they get paid the district rate. So.
Okay. So there's another question for you here, Luma, and I'm going to ask Maddie if you could speak to the research lens on it as well afterwards. So the question is, I'm curious about what curricular materials you use and how you support teachers with making grade level content accessible academically and culturally for all students. So I'd love to hear your take on it, Luma, and then Maddie, if you could speak to what the research says.
So, with district partnerships, we're sometimes tied to the curriculum that they pick, right? And we're not in the business of developing curriculum. There's a lot of strong curriculum out there. It's how do you adapt it to your students' needs? There's a lot of great technology out there now that can do that. Like our teachers love Magic School AI. You can take content from your curriculum, say, please adapt this, and describe your demographic, from which countries they're from, what age they're at, and they change that entire story with the different standards that are required to be more accessible and more engaging for multilingual students. So we're kind of tied to what the district is, but I think there's a lot of easier ways now to adapt that. Our libraries are robust from authors from all over the world, and kids requesting different. Right now, everybody's graphic novels, right? We want them to be Sorry, kids are leaving, so I'm getting some waves. So we want them to be engaged in their learning. And so they have to be able to relate to it. They have to see the practical application of it as well. And so really working with teachers, like, yeah, we know they have to learn algebra, but we have to be like, the students need to know where they're going to apply it. Or they're going to be like, why am I learning this? Right. And a lot of hands-on projects, because the more you can hold, touch, feel something, the more you absorb it. And that's for all learners. I just wanted to say, we do have a curriculum that we did develop around American culture, because we found a lot of the feedback we're getting from districts is, multilingual students don't participate in XYZ, right? And sometimes, you know what, they're not going to go to prom or homecoming because they don't know what it is. They don't know what is socially appropriate, what the expectation is. And so we do this learning around some of the cultural norms in America, how they're different from ours. When do we code switch? And, we do a lot of that work before they're mainstream back in, everything from norms at a restaurant to the cafeteria to hygiene and eating. I grew up part of the world where we ate with our hands, right? I know when I can eat with my hands and where I can't, right? But teaching the kids so they're not made fun of, or they don't want to participate because they don't know. What's Halloween, like small things like that, so they can participate and feel part of the larger community. And then also celebrating, Holi and Eid and all the other great celebrations, so the other students learn about what's in the building as well.
I'll just affirm from a research-based perspective, a lot of what Luma lifted for the group. The applied learning, project-based learning, these kinds of approaches really, really lend themselves to robust language learning environments and academic learning environments too, right? So the sit and get approach is generally not thought of as high quality instruction for anyone, but it's particularly challenging for students who are in the process of learning a language. And so to the degree that we can integrate those approaches into our curricular materials, I think of a curriculum also always as being a baseline. And you talk to anybody who teaches, and they're going to say that they supplement their curriculum in ways that are relevant to the students who they have in their room. So maybe that means selecting some specific texts that you would pull in, right? These kinds of modifying and assignments or modifications to what you have as your baseline that reflect the needs of the students and the cultural backgrounds of students who are in the room. I'll just also hit upon one other piece of this question, and that had to do with how you support teachers, right? I think one of the things that is just so important here is helping teachers over time acquire the skills to scaffold instruction based on language needs. And what that means is a day of PD is not going to do it. It's not going to be implemented in a classroom well. It takes time. It takes trial and error. It takes room to talk with your fellow teachers about what you did and how it worked or didn't work. And so we're really trying to build capacity over time through things like professional learning communities or a series of learning that stretches over the course of a year to really work with teachers and give them a chance to try something, make mistakes, try again. I think those things are incredibly important when thinking about building capacity that's going to lead to real change in classrooms.
Okay, thank you so much. We are out of time, and so we're going to hand it over to the next panel, but just want to express my deep gratitude to both of you for being on this panel. These are like amazing people. I have known them for a while in my life, and I hope you all will feel comfortable reaching out with any other questions that you all have. Passing it off to Alejandra now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this incredible webinar. I don't know about you, but I really appreciated the panel that just finished. So thank you both to Luma and Madeline and Nancy for moderating a great conversation. And today, or we are just about to start our panel, Supporting Academic and Socio-Emotional Success of Newcomer and Immigrant Origin Students. I'm so grateful to be here as your moderator. My name is Alejandra Vasquez Bauer. I use she, her pronouns. We can move to the next slide, please. And I am a fellow at the Century Foundation, a progressive policy think tank, where I work on K-12 education, and co-founder and director of the National Newcomer Network. I'm here joined by my co-founder, Shiloni Cruz Gonzalez, who is co-founder of the National Newcomer Network and co-chairs the coalition with me. We'll have information about that in a few minutes. She's also deputy director at Californians Together. We have an incredible panel for you of researchers and practitioners right in front of here. You have Carolyn Satin-Bajaj, who is an associate professor at UC Santa Barbara, Emma Merrill, the director of La Sierras Academy at Collegiate Academies in New Orleans, Louisiana, and Jamie Olney, who is a teacher at the Empire School District in Stanislaus County. Sorry if I mispronounced that, Jamie, please correct me when you jump on, in California. So thank you to all of them for joining us. I'm going to pass the mic to Carolyn to get us settled in the research before we jump into discussion.
Thanks so much, Alejandra, and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to have a chance to be part of this conversation. And I'm just going to do a little laying of the groundwork, a few definitions. So as our prior panel talked about, we're focusing today on our panel on newcomer immigrant students, and we're just using this definition. One of the things we may talk about policy is there isn't a nationally recognized clear-cut definition, but generally thought of as students who've been enrolled in the U.S. in schools in the U.S. for 3 years or less. Well, also you may hear the phrase immigrant origin student, and that generally refers to students with at least one foreign-born parent. So it can be first-generation immigrant students and U.S.-born students who are second generation who have at least one immigrant parent. Some statistics just to ground our work, that 1 in 4 students has at least one foreign-born parent, so would fall into the immigrant origin classification. That's about 20 million students in our public schools. 90% of these students are themselves US born, so second gen, but we do have about 1 million newcomers. Oh my goodness, I can't see this thing, in schools. Also important to keep in mind that about almost 700,000 students are undocumented themselves, and 7% of students in U.S. public schools live with at least one undocumented parent. So the implications of immigration enforcement, the threats of them, anti-immigrant rhetoric, really are touching a large number of students in our schools. Some of the highlights from the brief that you at your own leisure could review just are some of what we know about what schools and districts and classrooms can do to promote healthy development, achievement, and well-being. Our panelists prior talked about the importance of accessible communications in multiple languages, the centrality of family engagement in meaningful ways, that cultural diversity deeply embedded, not as a slap-on, but as part of the curriculum and school practices. The importance of after-school tutoring. The school day does not give enough time for many newcomer students to develop the skills and the confidence and the relationships that they could benefit from. The importance of understanding that basic needs and including legal rights and are so important, and schools can be a place where that can help make connections with community resources to help students and their families meet those basic needs. Thinking about social emotional well-being, that relationships, it all starts in relationships. Students need to have at least one adult in the building in whom they feel like they can trust, with whom they have some sort of connection. And so we're asking a lot of educators, and I love that Maddie ended with thinking about what teachers need, and their teachers need to be prepared. It's on all of us. It's on teacher ed programs, it's on states, it's on districts and PD to think about how teachers can feel and educators can feel like they can are equipped and knowledgeable to help confront anti-immigrant hostility and connect their students and families to resources. And then finally, that the role, and I think increasingly trauma, and we're talking much more about ACEs, that people are recognizing the range of traumas that young people are living with every day. And there are specific forms of migration related trauma that educators who are serving newcomers would benefit from knowing, but this goes well beyond the newcomer student population. So without further ado, I have a lot of policies and strategies. I don't want to take any more time. So I'm going to pass it back to Alejandra to get the conversation started.
All right. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for grounding us in the research in those briefs. As a reminder, you all should have access to the links to the briefs at the moment, and then also after the webinar is over. Thank you. Yes, thanks, Isabel. So I would like to bring on, we have Emma and Carolyn on here. Jamie, feel free to join us and turn on your camera and get started with our conversation. Thank you. Yes. So I would love to get started with Emma and Jamie telling us about the newcomer programs you work with. How are those programs structured? How long has that program been in place, and how's it evolved over time? I'll start with Emma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Merrill, and I'm the director. It's called Las Sierras Academy. We are a newcomer school in New Orleans for high school students. And we are a one-year program. We're a part of the Collegiate Academies Charter Network. And I was the ESL teacher 8 years ago at one of our collegiate high schools. And just realizing over time, like, our kids were practicing English. They were growing in English in my class, and also they were really struggling in other classes. I think in 2014 specifically, kind of shortly after Hurricane Katrina, we had a lot of kids reuniting with their parents who came to specifically rebuild the city during Katrina. And so we got this huge influx of students in 2014. And New Orleans didn't necessarily know how to serve these 16 and 17-year-old kids who were starting school as English learners as teenagers. And so, like I said, we had an ESL program, but students were getting to be seniors and they weren't graduating on time. So students were dropping out as juniors, or they were getting to be seniors and they were passing all their classes. They were getting straight A's, but they weren't passing the state exams that they needed to graduate. And so doing a ton of research and talking to a lot of folks across the country, realizing that, newcomer programs, especially for high schoolers, in their first or second year in the country, is what sets them up to be successful in order to graduate on time. And so Las Sierras is in year 3. 4, I guess. We started during COVID. That was fun. And so we're in year 4, kind of still a toddler, which is exciting. But we continue to build every year. And so, like I said, we're a one-year program. And after the year with us, students will go back to their homeschool and be supported there with our transition counselor and the ESL programs at their homeschool.
Thanks for sharing, Emma, and congratulations on a great first 3 years. Jamie, I would love to hear from you about, just tell us about your newcomer program and how it's structured, how long you've been there. You're on mute, Jamie.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have devices here. I'm juggling, but that's what teachers do, right? So I teach 7th and 8th grade English language development in the Central Valley of California. Oh, there's our lunch bell. Hey, this is real. This is in the trenches.
In the classroom.
Right, that's what I'm saying. This is as real as it gets. So traditionally, the neighborhood I teach in is around 90% Latino. However, in the past 7 years, we've had an influx of refugees from the Middle East. So Modesto is a refugee hub. So the World Relief Organization is stationed here. So now in my newcomer program, I not only have students from Mexico, Central American countries. I also have students this year from Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Afghanistan. Qatar, and many of those students are coming by way of refugee camps in other countries and have waited for years for their visas and are now finally coming to the United States. So I teach 3 blocks of English language development. My first block is newcomers, but I also want to say that they're beginning English learners because as well as students that are new to the United States, we also have a migrant camp. So we have students who have been with us since kindergarten, but they're going back and forth between California and other states or going back to Mexico. So even though California doesn't classify them as newcomers, they're still beginning English learners. So when I first came, and sorry, there's some background noise, we're doing lunch right now. So when I first came to GLIC, our newcomer program pretty much consisted of, we had bilingual paraprofessionals pulling students out of their classes and doing things like flashcards, bingo, whatever they could do. Really, they're doing the best with the resources that they had. When I came on, we made an ELA block that also included designated ELD, which is required by California. So they're getting their language arts instruction based on the grade level standards, as well as their designated ELD. I have to say this is the first year that we have had the largest percentage of newcomers coming directly either from their home country or refugee camps. Currently, I have students from 11 countries and speaking 5 languages. So there have been all kinds of new challenges this year in meeting their needs. I do have a bilingual paraprofessional who is Spanish English speaking. But in regards to the other languages, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. Google Translate, not that it's great, but we're using that as well as many other resources. So we I would say our newcomer program per se, as far as a classroom, has been in existence for 7 years, and that is just during their ELA block. During the rest of their day, they are in core classes with English-only students. So they are integrated throughout the rest of the day. They so to meet these various diverse language needs, cultural needs, we've had to rely rather as a team effort on partnerships with outside entities, with community agencies, with Teach Plus, Californians Together, advocacy organizations, Latino Chamber of Commerce, inner city ministry networks, La Raza parent groups. We really had to reach out and connect with our community and connect with just advocates in our community that are passionate about furthering the education of our multilingual learners. Our goal for our newcomers, as well as our students who have been with us for a while but still aren't reclassified English proficient, is for them to be reclassified English fluent before they go to high school. When they go to high school in our neighboring district, all English learners are currently only receiving a 45-minute elective. The rest of the time they're, I would say, thrown sink or swim into core college prep classes. And they lose their elective. So I was reading through the literature. I'm very fortunate that our administration here at the middle school, we're in a different district than the high school, is committed to preserving all those other entities that make an enriching program, including electives, including after-school programs for our students. So we have this extra additional pressure to move them as far as we can move them along the English learning continuum before they get to high school and those services drop off.
Thanks for sharing that, Jamie. And yes, for joining us during the school day. Just to say for all of our participants here, both Emma and Jamie and Luma from the previous conversation are joining us during the school day. So we're just very grateful for you lending your expertise during a regular work time. And that's why we'll hear bells going through the day. Yeah, just a part of it. I'd love to hear a little bit, Emma, going back to you about what it takes to set up these types of systems to support immigrant youth. And we'll go around for everybody, and Carolyn will come in with the research as well. But yeah, Emma, just to start, what was your experience setting up this system of support for your newcomer students' academic and social emotional growth, thinking about some of the relationships you had to build to be successful, and how to make core content accessible to all students and making it linguistically and culturally responsive for those arriving to the U.S.?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of different pieces of like setup and I could go on and on for forever, but I want to go back to the piece of, you know, seeing our kids become juniors and seniors and like not persisting. And so just to give you guys a little context, there are 9, we're going to get to policy, I know, in a second. But there are 9 states in the country that require students to pass exit exams in order to graduate. Louisiana is the only one of those states that requires even all of our newcomers, our English learners, to pass the same exams. So going back to data, which none of this could happen if we didn't have the data to prove that it was necessary, right? So going back to data, in 2019, I was helping a group of seniors pass the U.S. history. We call them LEAP exams in Louisiana. So the U.S. history LEAP. And we had 9 students, and out of 9 students, only 3 passed and were able to graduate. So that not only, you know, it looks poorly on our school, it's sad and like devastating for our kids. It was devastating for me. I went home in tears when I got like the results back, as did my kids, right? And so, you know, realizing like, obviously there's this unfair policy around state testing and requirements around state testing to graduate. But also we can do a lot more to make sure that there's a strong first year for our kids. And so in order to make this newcomer program happen, I had to be the squeaky wheel with my administration and had to be the squeaky wheel with our, I went to our board of directors, right? And said like, this is the data that shows that newcomer programs work to get kids to graduate on time. We had only 23% of our kids graduate on time this year who are English learners, and that is unacceptable, right? And so starting with data points, and then after that, I was given kind of like the green light to start my own research. And so I just cold called newcomer programs across the country. I'm sure I sent Fuji's an email. I sent emails to multiple newcomer programs. And fortunately enough, the Las Americas program in Houston said, yeah, come on over, come visit us, see what we're all about. And that was the first time that I had ever visited a newcomer program. As you can probably guess, they don't exist in Louisiana. We're the only one, right? In New Orleans. But so I visited Houston's Las Americas program, had many calls with their director, and got advice from a lot of other folks around the country. Like, what do I need to do first? What do I need to do second? Like, what does my program need to look like? Who do I need to talk to? And everyone said the same thing. Everyone said, start small. Don't start with 500 kids. Don't start with 12 classes. Don't start with a full building. Start small with a space in a building. I think Jamie will relate to this, right? Like she has a class and she has a newcomer class, right? And so my advice to start small was, okay, here's my proposal. We're going to be in a hallway of my current high school. And we're going to have 4 classes. We're going to have an English, math, elective, and a science. And those are going to be related to like the 9th grade credits that kids need in order to get started, but they're all going to be around building English proficiency. And so my next step was then to reach out to the same network that I had built through cold calls and emails and say what curriculum works, right? What do I need to use to build the core content for these classes? Got a lot of great feedback. And I took what my network was already doing to create curriculum. And I modified it based on the advice that I got from other like newcomer experts. And so our curriculum it's as any teacher knows, it's a mashup of a bunch of different things. There's no silver bullet, right? There's no curriculum that is like, this is the best for newcomers. You'll hear that, but but you always have to add and subtract. And so for example, our English classes, that's how we sort kids in our program, by English proficiency level, right? So they take the TEL exam as soon as they get to us. I had to get some funding for TEL, which is an incredible progress monitoring tool. But they take that exam, and then from there we decide what class they're going to be on. If they're level 1, they're in the basic ESL class. If they're level 2, they're in the more advanced proficiency class. But that content it is aligned to 9th grade standards. but is modified as necessary. And I think, Alejandra, to your question about like who do we need to connect with? It's newcomer programs, it's folks in academia for newcomers, and it's being the squeaky wheel with like your network or your district, showing them the hard data and some of the hard truths of why this is necessary.
Thanks so much, Emma. I think you actually answered a lot of the questions we've been getting in the Q&A already about sort of setting things up. And please remember, attendees, please feel free to jump into the Q&A, submit your questions. Jamie, would you like to add anything about how you set up those systems in your classroom?
Yeah, so ours is currently, as I mentioned before, a combined ELD, ELA class. So I was fortunate to have a curriculum, have resources to start with. You know, I didn't have to scour teacher pay teacher at midnight trying to find, even though I still do that as well to supplement. So there was a curriculum, but I think more paramount with the students I work with is the trauma that they come with. And I heard that mentioned. I have students that share with me or share through stories, you know, they fled cartel violence. They're separated from families. I have unaccompanied minors that are living with distant family members here. I have students that are still being spirited out of Afghanistan after the 2021 pullout, which was very chaotic and disastrous. And they are, you know, they've been in refugee camps for several years. I have students still coming from Syria. I was looking up, you know, their stories. Home Syria, like I'm Googling, it's like most dangerous city in the world. And they've been living in Jordan and Lebanon. So I'm getting more and more students. It's not only a language issue. Many students have either limited or interrupted learning in their home country or the countries that they were in refugee camps. So it's you know, it's teaching students just how to do school while they're acculturating to a new country, while they're learning the language of a new country, and then having these diverse languages, which is such an asset. And it can be very challenging at the same time. So I think more than a curriculum is focusing on social emotional, focusing on trauma and building a community of students who have been through all these various forms of trauma and challenges and are coming together. So for instance, an example, I did an activity where the students were sharing with a partner their hometown through Google Maps. And one of my students from Afghanistan, you know, had this terrified look on his face. It's like, well, I'm not sharing, you know, with Adolfo because he's going to think I'm a terrorist. You know, so they have these preconceived notions, you know, even like what they see on the news here, you know, about other groups. And, you know, here's our neighborhood. It's ethnic enclave. It's been traditionally students from Mexico, parents here for economic reasons. And now there's this influx of, so there's definitely a tension. So a lot of social emotional, a lot of mixing students and moving with different types of students. So I spend a lot of time on social emotional, on getting students comfortable with just speaking, with listening to students who are different from themselves, and then working school-wide with our staff from the cafeteria to after school, giving them extended learning time, getting them into clubs, talking to coaches, getting them really not just part of the class, but part of the school as a whole. And feeling like they're part of something and they're not, you know, outsiders in room F2, you know, learning English, and helping them as much as possible integrate with the school and collaborating beyond the school day. So I know I'm out of time. I have many more stories.
No, Jamie, thank you so much. I think addressing the assumptions and the anti-immigrant rhetoric that is taught and so much is a part of the work as a teacher, as a school leader, and as folks who are engaged in supporting immigrant youth in our classrooms. And so I appreciate you bringing that in and the importance of addressing that very quickly, because it is really important for our students to be able to succeed academically as well, right? So thank you for sharing that with us. And bringing that into the space. We're moving into, I would love to answer a couple of questions you all sent. So many questions about the Las Sierras program that I know Emma is getting into in the Q&A and sending some questions. I would love to get to this first question about best practices for teaching multilingual learners and immigrant youth that you all have seen in your work in organizations. And I want to start with Carolyn. As you've visited places that support newcomers and done this research, what are you seeing as some of the best practices?
Thank you. And I love hearing, I think it's such a useful, in some ways, juxtaposition that Emma has this sort of like this robust standalone program, and Jamie's made something terrific out of maybe fewer resources, less infrastructure, which I think is actually much more common, and that teachers and schools and districts are sort of figuring out how to make it work with what they do. And Jamie, I really loved how you talked about the imperative to meet content standards and also language development. That's something that I've seen, and then I've seen a lot in the questions is how do we deliver content and while also students are learning the language. And so I think thoughtfully engaging with that challenge is something that I've seen folks who've really thought about how do we maintain, because we don't want them to get to high school and they haven't had enough math content because they didn't understand it because it was delivered in a language they couldn't understand, and now they can't meet the A through G standards if we're in California, or the requirements. So schools that really map out the questions about transitioning from junior high to high school and how are we that articulation process, I think are really important practices. And both of you and all the panels have talked about, if kids don't feel safe, if kids don't feel like they can belong, if they're experiencing acute trauma, then all of this goes by the wayside anyway. And so yes, it's culturally sustaining practices, but it's even more than that. It's like it's showing up, it's recognizing all of these things and putting in place. And I just want to underscore again just how I think the policy landscape is failing teachers and educators, because you guys are doing superhuman things on your own. Teachers pay teachers up at night, and it's frustrating, and that's the context in which you're working. So thank you all, and folks in policy positions. No one wants to be constantly running fire drills, and it feels like we're still there. So that was a lot, but hopefully that highlights some of the practice.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I'd like to close out our panel pretty quickly with just a one sentence from you all. We have so many practitioners here listening in from across the country, and I'd love if you could leave them just a one sentence top piece of advice that you have that you tell folks when you're working with newcomers. So what is the fundamental element of your work, either at the school level, Emma, the classroom level, Jamie, or Carolyn, systemically for supporting newcomer students? Let's start with Emma. One sentence, please.
One sentence. One sentence is you just meet kids where they're at and love them. That's it. And if I could go on and on, but I think like our students have experienced a ton of things that I will never have to experience or go through, and they need so much love and support when they start with us, not just academics. I think you already hit on that.
Thanks, Emma. Jamie?
And I would echo that, creating a safe and welcoming environment. It's imperative that all the students, with their backgrounds, that them themselves are seen and heard, and that they matter. I think making students feel that they matter in that space, in any space.
Thank you. And Carolyn, close us out.
There are so many assets and so much richness among these students and their families, and in our communities. So you don't have to go it alone. You don't have all the answers. Don't feel like you should, but also students have so many of the answers. So start with them and what they bring to the table.
Thank you to this incredible panel, Emma, Carolyn, Jamie, bringing all your expertise from the classroom, the school level, from the research background, and from across the country. Thank you for being here with us for this panel. With that, again, we could have talked for hours. So again, thank you so much. And pass it back to Nate.
Thank you to everyone here. I will close us out only by noticing that there are still lots of questions in the Q&A section here, and that we aren't going to have time to get to all of them. So because of that, we have a survey that will pop up on the last slide. And if you still have questions, if you want to contact any of the people here, please just drop your email address in that survey along with your question, and we will directly respond. Again, thank you to everyone who took part in this conversation today. There's so many parts that I am still thinking about. This is part of this broader series that we do at EdResearch for Action, where we're trying to get the top quality researchers across the country in direct conversation with the people who are doing this work, the experts in schools. And so we have a group of 25 advisors who are school and district leaders and top thinkers kind of across the country who are in working groups working with researchers to take on more of these topics. We just came from, there was a really interesting conversation about Algebra 1 interventions and how we can get kids through this gateway of Algebra 1 differently. There's another conversation going on right now about school-wide supports for student mental health and how to think about what schools do in-house and how they can work better with outside agencies. So this is what we do at EdResearch for Action. We're so grateful to all of you for joining. I will just quickly note, if you can switch to the next slide, that EdResearch for Action is one of several initiatives that we run that are all aimed at making research more accessible and useful to people like you, to people who are doing this work in schools. We also run something called EdInstruments that tries to help us think about the measurement tools that we're all using, the data gathering that we're doing, and how to do this in the best possible way. And EdWorking Papers, where you will see kind of the latest upcoming research. And so these three sites all exist simultaneously. If you come to our website in the next month, we are rolling out some new branding. You can see it here, and new ways that these three sites all connect to each other and allow you to see resources from all of them at once. So again, we are so grateful for your time. If you can skip through to this survey slide, we'll drop this link in the chat. We use data a lot. We believe in it as much as we believe in research and multiple forms of expertise. And so if you could tell us what worked for you and what didn't work about this webinar, we will try to do more of what worked. And again, if you have questions, if you have follow-up for us, please, there's an open-ended question at the end. Just drop that in there and you will hear from us.